The National Liberal Club, also known as NLC, is a London gentlemen's club. Membership is open to both men and women. Established by William Ewart Gladstone in 1882 to provide club facilities for Liberal Party campaigners among the newly enlarged electorate following the Third Reform Act in 1884. The club's neo-Gothic building on the embankment of the River Thames is the second largest clubhouse ever built. Designed by Alfred Waterhouse, it was completed in 1887. Its current facilities include a dining room, a bar, function rooms, a billiards room, a smoking room, a library, and an outdoor riverside terrace. It is located at Whitehall Place, close to the Houses of Parliament, the Thames Embankment and Trafalgar Square. The genesis of the club lay with Liberal Party activist Arthur John Williams, who proposed the creation of such a club at a special general meeting of the short-lived Century Club on May 14, 1882, so as to provide a home for democracy, void of the class distinction associated with the Devonshire and Reform clubs. The first full meeting of the new club was held on November 16, 1882, at the Westminster Palace Hotel on Victoria Street. The Century Club itself then merged into the NLC at the end of the year. In its early years, the club declared its objects to be 1. The provision of an inexpensive meeting place for liberals and their friends from all over the country. 2. The furtherance of the liberal cause. 3. The foundation of a political and historical library as a memorial to Gladstone and his work. An initial circular for subscribers meant that by the end of 1882, 2,500 men from over 500 towns and districts had already signed up for the new club, and membership would reach 6,500 by the time the clubhouse opened in 1887. The club's foundation stone was laid by Gladstone on November 9, 1884, when he declared, speaking generally, I should say there could not be a less interesting occasion than the laying of the foundation stone of a club in London. 4. After all, what are the clubs of London? I am afraid little else than temples of luxury and ease. This, however, is a club of a very different character, and envisioned the club as a popular institution for the mass electorate. However, another of the club's founders, G.W.E. Russell, noted, we certainly never foresaw the palatial pile of terracotta and glazed tiles which now bears that name. Our modest object was to provide a central meeting place for metropolitan and provincial liberals, where all the comforts of life should be attainable at what are called popular prices, but added at the least, we meant our club to be a place of ease to the radical toiler. But Gladstone insisted that it was to be a workshop dedicated to strenuous labor. Funds for the clubhouse were raised by selling 40,000 shares of £5 each, in a limited liability company, with the unusual stipulation that no shareholder should have more than 10 votes, so as to prevent a few wealthy men from dominating the club. However, this only raised £70,000, and so an additional £52,400 was raised for the construction of the clubhouse by the Liberal Central Association. The remaining £30,000 necessary was raised by mortgage debentures. In the 5 years between the club's establishment and completion of the building in 1887, it occupied temporary premises on the corner of Northumberland Avenue and Trafalgar Square. During this time, a parliamentary question was asked in the House of Commons about the white ensign being raised on the club's flagpole as part of a prank. The clubhouse was still unfinished when it opened its doors in 1887, but it was opened early on June 20 to allow members to watch that year's Jubilee processions from the club terrace. The opening was marked by an inaugural banquet for 1,900 people at the Royal Aquarium off Parliament Square, which Punch reported saw the consumption of 200 dozen bottles of Pommery champagne. It was when the club had only recently moved to its present address that Bloody Sunday ensued on its doorstep during the Trafalgar Square riot of November 13, 1887. NLC members flocked to the windows to watch George Bernard Shaw, who was a member of the club, address the demonstration, and later in the day, witness the bloodshed which ensued. In its late 19th century heyday, its membership was primarily political, but had a strong journalistic and even bohemian character. Members were known to finish an evening's dining by diving into the Thames. Of the club's political character, George Bernard Shaw remarked at a debate in the club, "I have never yet met a member of the National Liberal Club who did not intend to get into Parliament at some time, except those who, like our chairman Lord Carrington, are there already." On the club's launch, it represented all factions of liberalism, but within 4 years it was rocked by the Home Rule crisis of 1886, which saw the Liberal Unionists led by Joseph Chamberlain and the Marquis of Hartington, both of whom had been founder members of the NLC, secede from the party and eventually go into alliance with the Conservatives. Indeed, Chamberlain had been one of the NLC's most enthusiastic promoters upon its launch. At the 1884 ceremony of Gladstone's foundation stone-laying for the club, Hartington had argued that the club would be the future home of Chamberlain's radical Birmingham caucus, and Chamberlain pointedly refused to contradict him. Chamberlain himself resigned in 1886, shortly after the Home Rule split. Hartington and other prominent Liberal Unionists followed early in 1887, and when a further 130 Unionists simultaneously seceded from the club in 1889, the Scots Observer called it one of the most important events that has recently occurred in home politics, due to its ramifications for the Liberal Party breaking in two. The club enjoyed a reputation for radicalism, and H.V. Amy records that radicals secured a distinct success when the radical wing of the National Liberal Club, NLC, captured the club's organization in the summer of 1897 and elected a new political committee with Henry Labouchere as the chairman and H. J. Reckitt as secretary. The committee itself included Sir Robert Reid, Stanhope, Herbert Samuel, Rufus Isaacs, and W. F. Thompson, the editor of Reynolds News. The committee wrote an open letter to the constituencies, asking them for their opinions on policy, designating several areas where opinion would be welcome. By November, the replies indicated that the weight of opinion lay with the democratization of Parliament, involving the abolition of the Lord's veto, reform of registration and electoral law, and devolution. Amongst other prominent reforms were included all the major issues of the day, except nationalization. These were then drafted into a manifesto of radical reform which was greatly resented by the official organization. 38,000 copies were circulated, and a meeting of the General Committee of the NLF at Derby agreed to make reform a priority, a decision endorsed by Asquith a few days later. This reputation for radicalism was underlined when former Liberal Prime Minister Lord Rosebery resigned from the club in September 1909, denouncing it as a hotbed of socialism. Several discussion groups met at the club, including the Rainbow Circle in the 1890s, an influential group of liberal, Fabian and socialist thinkers who came to be identified with the Bloomsbury Group. It was also the site of much intrigue in the Liberal Party over the years, rivaling the Reform Club as a social center for liberals by the advent of World War I, although its membership was largely based on liberal activists in the country at large. It was built on such a large scale to provide London club facilities for liberal activists from around the country, justifying its use of the description national. On March 22, 1893, during the second reading of the club's registration bill, the Conservative MP, and later Liberal defector, Thomas Gibson Bowles told the House of Commons, "I am informed there is an establishment not far from the house frequented by radical millionaires and released prisoners, the National Liberal Club, where an enormous quantity of whiskey is consumed." Despite this remark, it seems that the club accounted for relatively little alcohol consumption by the standards of the day. Herbert Samuel commented in 1909 that the average annual consumption of alcoholic liquor per NLC member was 31s. 40 per annum, which compared very favorably with equivalent conservative clubs, including 33s. 5d for the nearby Constitutional Club, 48s. For the City Carlton Club, and 77s. For the Junior Carlton Club. One possible explanation is the strength of the temperance movement in the Liberal Party at the time. On December 3, 1909, Liberal Chancellor David Lloyd George used the club to make a speech fiercely denouncing the House of Lords, in what was seen as a de facto launch of the People's Budget general election of January 1910. On November 21, 1911, the club was one of a number of buildings to have their windows smashed in by the Suffragette Women's Social and Political Union, in protest at the Liberal government's inaction over votes for women. During the Marconi scandal of 1912, Winston Churchill used a speech to the club to mount an impassioned defense of embattled ministers David Lloyd George and Rufus Isaacs, asserting that there was no stain of any kind upon their characters.